What is going on, football fans? New York Giants training camp is about to get underway in just 2 short days. Now, the rookies reported today. Daniel Jones remains unsigned. He's the only rookie that remains unsigned, and I expect him to sign those papers very shortly. But in this video today, I wanted to talk about the wide receiver position. Now, of course, Odell Beckham is gone, and he made those comments that I will not talk about today. He's no longer a Giant. He is not relevant when it comes to my channel. But the wide receiver core is pretty deep when you look at this year's receiving core for the New York Giants. Now, I think we all know who the top 2 receivers are going to be, and that is, of course, Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard. We also expect Evan Ingram to be heavily involved in the passing game. When you look at Ingram's stats last year and his rookie season, when Beckham did not play, he was probably the most targeted player on the Giants team when Beckham was out. Of course, Beckham only played 16 out of the last 32 games for this football team. But yeah, I expect Ingram to be heavily involved. But I think the training camp battle is going to be for the 3rd wide receiver position. Now, when you look at the Giants' first 2, they're more of slot guys, right? And Ingram's more of a guy up the seam. They could certainly use a burner on the outside, which is why when I go over their wide receivers, I am going to express who I think has the best opportunity and who probably doesn't have much of an opportunity at all. Now, of course, some of these guys are still in contention for a roster spot and may see the field if some opportunity presents itself. Let's not forget, Victor Cruz was undrafted. He didn't make the Giants roster out of camp, and then he came onto the scene when he got his opportunity. So it's always important to look at everybody that's on the roster. But the first guy I'm going to talk about is CODY LATIMER. CODY LATIMER's now been in the league for like 5 years. He had a lot of potential coming into the league. He was a mid-second round pick for the Denver Broncos. And a lot of people, myself included, thought the reason that he hadn't really came onto the scene had less to do with his skill set and more to do with the fact that he wasn't really given an opportunity. Of course, the Denver Broncos always had premium wide receivers, whether it be Demaryius Thomas, Emmanuel Sanders, Julius Thomas. They had weapons there in Denver, and Latimer really didn't get the chance to show it off. In his 5 years, he's been pedestrian. He's only had 635 yards receiving in his 5-year career, and 72 of those yards came last year with the Giants in that Week 17 matchup against the Dallas Cowboys, in which Latimer showed some promise when he got an opportunity, of course, when Beckham was out. He actually made a beautiful one-handed catch. He had 72 yards on 4 receptions and a touchdown. He does produce some height. I believe he's 6'2", 6'3", 215 pounds. But do I think he's a threat for the 3? I think he's in contention, but he's probably not the favorite to me. But he's probably this is really between 3 guys. But we're going to go over the receiving core, and he is certainly one of them. The next guy I wanted to touch on is the guy who going in is probably the favorite. And that, of course, is Corey Coleman. Corey Coleman, formerly of the Browns, tremendous talent coming out of college. He was the 15th overall selection, and the guy is a burner. And he hasn't really had much of an impact in terms of receiving with the Giants. The Giants acquired him mid-season last year. He didn't put up much. But where he really helped this team was in the return game last year. When he got the opportunity to do that, it was night and day. You know, when he got here and when he didn't. He made a lot of big plays in the return game, flipping the field position, and was a large part of the reason why this team was able to go 4-4 over their last 8 games. Him and Jamon Brown were huge midseason acquisitions. He's a little shorter. He's 5'11", 185. The problem with Coleman and why I think he hasn't really taken off in the NFL is because of his height. I don't think he possesses the skills to be that slot receiver like a Golden Tate, which is generally where you'd want a 5'11" receiver. Now, he has the speed to play on the outside. He ran a 4.37 40 at his pro day, and like I said, we saw that in the return game. He could certainly take the top off a defense, and I think if he was 6'1", 6'2", it would be another story. I think he'd be a very good receiver in this league, but he's kind of a tweener. He's a shorter receiver that needs to play on the outside, which is why I don't think he's really taken off to this point in his career. So that's it, man. That's the problem with Corey Coleman. But going in due to his experience, due to his upside, keep in mind this guy, I think it's only his 4th year in the league still, and he was fairly productive with the Browns. I think he averaged about 400, 450 yards a season the last 2 years. I think he has the best chance to make an impact in that 3rd wide receiver spot. The next guy we're going to talk about is Darius Slayton. Now, when I think of Darius Slayton, 5th round pick out of Auburn. Now, Auburn doesn't really have that offense that really gave Slayton the ability to show off his receiving skills. He caught for about 650, 700 yards the last 2 years in college. But when I look at him, to me, he seems like the receiver with the most upside long term. He's built like the guy we just talked about, Corey Coleman, in the sense that he's a speed demon. He ran a 4.3940 as opposed to Coleman's 4.37. The difference between these two wide receivers, Slayton has 2 inches on him. He's 6'1" as opposed to 5'11". 6'1", 190 pounds, a 5th-round pick. Some of that is due to the fact that he played at Auburn, in my opinion. I think had he went to a school that could have showed off his talents more, he may very well have been a higher pick, maybe a 3rd-round pick. He's a vertical threat with elite straight-line speed. That is his strength. Now, the problem with him is he has a limited route tree. That's what the scouts say. He didn't run many routes in college. It was more just fly patterns and screen passes. Wasn't a lot of slants, wasn't a lot of curl patterns. So it's certainly something he's going to have to work on. He, of course, has the ability, and he's pretty good at it, at creating separation because of his speed. But he's not a very polished wide receiver. Now, of course, he did impress at mandatory minicamps and OTAs, and I think a lot of Giants fans are really looking forward to seeing what Darius Slayton could bring to this team in training camp and preseason alike, and he's certainly well within contention for that number 3 wide receiver role. Those first 3 names are the guys that I think stand the best chance to get that number 3 spot, and I think that's who it's really between. The next guy we're going to touch on is a veteran, and that, of course, is Bennie Fowler. Bennie Fowler's been in the league for a while. He's approaching 30. I think he's going to be 29 this year. 28, I should say. His previous year with the Denver Broncos, in 4 starts, he had 350 yards on 29 catches in 2017. Last year for the Giants, he was rather pedestrian, but reports have come out that every OTA, every mandatory minicamp, this guy played really well. The problem I see with Bennie Fowler is he is not what the Giants really need at that 3rd wide receiver spot. He's very similar in terms of skill set, not as good as these guys, but very similar to Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard, meaning that he's more of a slot guy, a guy that runs short routes. So Fowler may make the squad as a backup, maybe a 6th or 7th, maybe a 5th wide receiver, but I don't see him having a real role in this offense. I do think he could certainly contend to make the 53-man roster, though, being that he has that veteran presence and he has some experience. With the Giants last year, he had 199 yards on 16 catches. And then there's 2 more guys we're going to touch on. Reggie White Jr., the undrafted prospect, and a lot of people like this kid. And look for him to potentially contend. He has some height. I believe he's 6'2", 6'3". Very interesting prospect out of Monmouth. He had a great year last year. I think he caught for about 1,100, 1,200 yards. And Monmouth, over the course of history recently, has produced some good wide receivers at the pro level. Now, some of that may have to do with the fact that Chris Hogan was playing for Tom Brady, but he had some success with the Patriots. And then, of course, you had Miles Austin, which we remember he had a few Pro Bowl years with the Dallas Cowboys. I like his upside. I don't think he's ready to compete. I think it's going to be hard for him to crack the 53-man roster because of all the depth we have at this position. And the next guy I'm going to touch on, I think, is ahead of him on the depth chart, even though I think Reggie White Jr. probably has more of an upside. But Russell Shepard is a veteran. He's 29 years old, and everybody says that this guy is a very good special teams contributor. So once again, much like a Bennie Fowler, he's a veteran. I don't expect him to compete for that 3rd spot. However, I think he stands a good chance to make the 53-man roster. He's caught for about 600 yards over the last 3 seasons. But, yeah, his main contributions, I think, will be on special teams, not so much the field. But as far as the 3rd receiver goes, I think it's between Latimer, I think it's between Corey Coleman, and I think it's between Darius Slayton. I think those 3 guys are going to be in a very tightly contested battle. Going in, I would say Corey Coleman is the slight favorite, with Latimer and Slayton kind of neck and neck in the 2 spot. But we're going to have to wait and see. If Slayton really impresses in training camp, he certainly is going to have the chance to take over that 3rd wide receiver spot. Like I said, he's much like Coleman in terms that they're both burners. They're both kind of limited in their route running ability. They don't have the best of hands. But where he has him is he got 2 inches on him, which is huge at a wide receiver position, 6'1" to 5'11". But like I said, we'll have to wait and see. As always, if you liked what you watched, please subscribe, drop a comment, maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.